I don't want to see again in public. In private, you can do whatever you want, but in public, including in public schools, to see people trying to have children, have small people having to pray in the classrooms, I think that people are a bit fed up to see that.
Premier Legault reacting to a previous announcement by Bernard Dranville earlier in the day when he took questions about the government now seeing that this issue of what's happening in some public schools has apparently gotten out of control. Their investigation is going to get bigger, wider ranging, if you will. Another school in Laval singled out today. I mentioned David Hertel would be here. My good friend, Tom Mulcair, is in on Fridays. But I forget the schedule has changed sometimes, Tom. Tom, I don't even know how you manage your own schedule because you're everywhere. I don't know how you remember to go where you go from day to day.
Sometimes Dean is a little bit worried with about 30 seconds to go before I get on air with you.
I bet.
So this is the Intolerance Olympics, and, the gold seemed to be slipping away from the CAQ. Parti Québécois, seem to be strong in the home stretch, but François Legault's not to be outdone. And this is a race, but it's a race to the bottom. This is all about dog whistles, politics, and code words, and going after Muslims. It's Islamophobia, pure and simple. They've been going at this strong since the Bedford School. 11 teachers turfed with no real investigation, only stuff done internally by people sent in from Quebec City, simply because it had made the papers and they had to react to the Bedford School, whatever the situation was. And we don't know because, again, nobody's had the chance to defend themselves. You can just imagine if this would have ever happened anywhere else, firing 11 people or at least removing them from their jobs on hearsay, essentially, because of a workplace dispute. So it's the same thing here. Look at some of the accusations here. This is really serious. Teachers have been heard speaking Arabic to each other. Ooh, that reminds me of one of my colleagues that I do a panel show with. She was on about with us a couple of years ago, and she said she found it really offensive when she heard two people speaking English together in Carrefour Laval. That was the type of thing. She was in a store and heard two people speak English here in Quebec. It really shocked her. That's what this is about. It's intolerance. Full stop.
Okay.
And Legault and Drainville and Jean-François Roberge were all over it today. But the threat, of course, is always to use the notwithstanding clause because, of course, it would be discriminatory. That's why you would have to use the notwithstanding clause. So let's compare François Legault and Doug Ford. How? Well, Doug Ford is announcing today through his housing minister, Paul Calandra. The problem is there's not housing available in cities like Toronto. So they're going to use tough words. They're going to start cleaning up the encampments. And they're using words that they know are politically popular. They're going to have them cleaned out. And Doug Ford says, because it's also against the Charter of Rights to tell people that their right to a home doesn't exist. But that's what Doug Ford is saying. He's saying that you don't want to see poor people in the street. They shouldn't exist. And he's going to remove them from the line of sight of the good people of Toronto instead of realizing that we're in one of the richest countries in the world. We have a democracy. We have rights. We're peaceful compared to so many other places on the planet. And Doug Ford said that he will go after them, use extreme powers that he will give to the municipality because they're getting complaints from the good citizen that they have to look at poor people. And he's going to use the notwithstanding clause of the Charter. Now, there's one element missing here. It's somebody in Ottawa to stand up for the Charter of Rights. Now, who could that be? Oh, yes, the Prime Minister of Canada. Of course, he could have referred this whole question of whether or not you can use the notwithstanding clause as a preemptive measure before something's even been declared by the courts to be against the Charter of Rights. But that would have required a bit of political courage to refer that to the Supreme Court, and he's hoping that it will get stalled, and it looks like it will get stalled until after the next federal election. Meanwhile, people who have had their rights taken away in Quebec and in Ontario will never have had redress, and, they have the old saying, justice delayed is justice denied. But that's where we are in 2024 in Canada. Ho, 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 Merry Christmas, 'tis the season to be good to your neighbors but just make sure you hide people who have a different religion than yours, and you hide people who happen to be poor.
Okay, Tom, I asked this question of our listeners earlier in the show, specifically with what Quebec is going to do in this investigation into these schools. With all due respect, do you not have a problem, an issue with children in school, in a public school system in Quebec, praying in class while other children who perhaps don't share their religion sit there and watch, or girls who are told you can't play a sport because girls don't get to play sports as far as our culture is concerned? Does that seem like something that should be acceptable in the public system?
Does anyone have the ability to say that they know that this has happened? Has there been any objective analysis of this where both sides have been allowed to speak? Or is this all one-sided rumors and hearsay and innuendo? We don't know about any of this stuff. This is all stuff coming at us from the CAQ, which has proven time and again that it's intolerant in general.
Yeah, well, I think before it came from the CAQ, it came from somewhere else. The CAQ, I don't think, just invented this. I mean, someone must have complained. Someone must have said something.
Of course somebody complained. Of course somebody said something. But then you don't make this front page news without having a full investigation and without having the ability to find out objectively what's actually going on. This is kangaroo court.
But in essence, they said that today. There will be an investigation to try to find out what has been going on.
But the way you just said it, Aaron, with all the respect that I have for you for the many years we worked together, you affirmed it as fact, as something that we know. How can you accept that young women are being told this? How can you accept that that young people are praying in class, even though other people don't have the same religious belief? None of that's been objectively proven.
Well, okay.
It
hasn't been proven in a court of law, Tom.
Let me just finish. When you believe things or you're told things about a religious minority, and you're willing to believe the worst, and you're willing to believe something with it, this type of rumor has been used against other religious minorities historically. And I think that it takes a certain number of people to stand up to this and say, if it's happening, it has to be analyzed and weighed objectively and looked at by people who are going to listen to both sides and find out what's actually going on. But the way this comes out, Aaron, this is a way of stigmatizing and going after a minority, which is, by the way, what Bill 21 does, and we've talked about that any number of times. Bill 21 goes after religious minorities generally, and the Muslim population in particular. There's a chapter in there that can only apply to Muslim women. They're already stigmatized. They're already pointed out. And the same way that I've written my papers for the last 2 times in the Gazette have been about anti-Semitism and creeping anti-Semitism here in Quebec. I think that there's a generalized problem of intolerance towards minorities in general and to religious minorities in particular. And it's being fed by a government that sees this intolerance as a political advantage. The same way Doug Ford in Ontario sees going after homeless encampments to his political advantage and using that as politics on the flimsiest of hearsay and what's going around like that without any serious analysis and putting that on the front page and saying you're going to go after it by removing the charter. That doesn't sound to me like Legault needs anything in the way of an investigation. He's the judge, the jury, and he's already come up with his decision without hearing both sides. That's the nub of the problem.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. I choose not to believe that. I've not heard from parents. No one's called me directly to say, hey, you hear what happened in my school, and you're seeming to make the point, Tom, that if someone did, they have an axe to grind. I'm not prepared to admit that.
No, hold on. Did you just tell me that you've spoken with people who say that this has happened in their children's class?
I'm saying I have not spoken to someone who said that, but from what I read, there were parents involved, there were other teachers involved. Unless someone decided to make all that up, I'm going to assume it might have happened, and that based on that, maybe an investigation would not be a bad idea.
But we're not at the investigation stage, Aaron. That's the whole problem. Legault's already said he's got the results, and that's why he's going to bring in the Charter of Rights. He said the same thing in the Bedford School. He sent in bureaucrats from Quebec City, but there was never anything done that would pass even the slightest legal test of hearing both sides. And how do you evacuate the most basic principle of hearing both sides, which is the foundation of natural justice, and go and remove 11 teachers from their job because it's popular for Legault to go after religious minorities? Okay. And I think it's important to stand up for these principles.
No, I think it is. And I think if you use this for political purposes, and clearly that's at this point, I think what the CAQ is doing, I find that reprehensible. But at the other side, if there is legitimate concern here, I think it needs to be investigated, because if it's happening in one place, it could be happening in two. And if it's happening in two, it could be happening in five. And it looks like that's what's happening right now. So yes, let's have an investigation. I don't support invoking the charter here, Tom. I'm not saying let's have the notwithstanding clause put in. I'm saying, as you just said, let's find out what's really going on and then decide what it is we need to do, if anything.
Well said.
That's it. I guess we'll let it go at that.
Yes.
Tom, have a good weekend.
You too.
Take good care. Tom Mulcair.